The night my sister called me a thief in my mother's kitchen, I tasted iron in my mouth and said nothing. I stood there with my hands around a chipped blue mug, steam slipping past my cheek, while Lena's voice sliced the air like it had every right to live there. You took Dad's watch, she said, loud enough for the entire house to hear. The one he promised me, she said, me like it was a prayer. Mom didn't look at me. She was busy polishing the silver, pretending she hadn't heard, because ignoring me had become her favorite kind of performance. Dad's ghost hung in the hall, in the way the light curved around his framed military portrait. He'd been gone 6 months. The watch had been his only selfish luxury, a heavy, stubborn thing that ticked like a second heart. I hadn't taken it. I wasn't even the one he'd promised it to. Check her room? Lena pressed, sugary sweet to Mom, like we were sharing a joke, only I was too dense to get. You know how she keeps boxes under the bed? Keepsakes. She rolled the word in her mouth until it sounded like sickness. Ava hoards things. I felt the heat rise up my throat, that familiar, humiliating burn. I remembered the first time freshman year when Lena told the dinner table I'd cried in gym class because I couldn't climb a rope. Dad had defended me then. Now he lived in a cedar box, and his silence was the loudest thing in the house. I didn't take the watch, I said, voice steady. It surprised me that it could be. I haven't touched Dad's room since the funeral. Mom didn't meet my eyes. Let's not escalate. She wiped a napkin that wasn't dirty. This isn't becoming. What wasn't becoming me? Standing here with my thrift store coat and my worn heels, my tote bag with a stitched up strap. I'd come straight from work at the clinic where I answered phones and made appointments, and watched families arrive in pairs and trios, arguing about parking tickets and dog hair on their clothes. I liked the soft kind of chaos. The clinic smelled like alcohol pads and coffee grounds. Home smelled like lemon oil and denial. Just let her look, I said. Take my drawers, my bed, my coat, my bag. Turn me inside out. I put the mug down carefully because my hands had begun to shake. Lena smiled. She'd grown into her beauty the way ivy overtakes a wall. Slow, relentless, inevitable. At 29, she had Dad's eyes and Mom's posture and a way of taking rooms hostage. My older sister by 2 years, chiseled and perfumed and always perched on the edge of something expensive. You're being dramatic, she said, already gliding past me, her bracelets kissing each other at her wrist. She went through my room like it owed her money. Pulled out drawers, tossed my socks on the floor, lifted my mattress, and let it drop with a thud that felt like a judge's gavel. She flashed Mom a look that said, see, I'm doing the hard thing you won't. When she knelt to check beneath the bed, her hair fell over her shoulder in a perfect, glossy sheet. She lifted my memory box, ticket stubs, a hospital bracelet from when I'd broken my arm, a Polaroid of Dad and me with our faces smudged by sunlight. She thumbed through everything with theatrical boredom, like she was being forced to read a stranger's diary. Like my life was made of napkins and lint and uninteresting dust. She didn't find the watch. She found the deed. I had folded it into thirds and had tucked it beneath the Polaroid. Knave enough to believe paper made things real and private. The deed was for a downtown storefront, half renovated with good bones. Tin ceiling, brick walls, a door that stuck in the summer. I'd bought it quietly from a retiring clockmaker who liked the way I listened when he spoke. You care about time, he'd told me, like it was a blessing. You wear it carefully. I'd planned to finish the build out and open a maker space cafe, coffee and light, rentable benches, soldering irons and sewing machines, and a print press we'd rescued from an old campus shop I'd been saving for years. I drafted business plans on sticky notes and, in the margins of my lunch breaks, I hadn't told my family because you don't hand a match to someone who likes fire. What's this? Lena's voice lilted. Innocent, curious, she unfolded the paper and read. I watched her face light up the way it did when she saw herself reflected in a window. This is, you bought a building. My mouth opened, then closed. In the kitchen, Mom stopped polishing. The air shifted like a storm thinking about land. I reached for the paper, but Lena stepped back, out of reach, laughing. She's joking? She called to Mom. You're joking, right? With what money? I thought of every extra shift, every cheap dinner, every weekend tutoring neighborhood kids in algebra, every ugly apartment I'd lived in since college so I could tuck away a few more dollars. I thought of my friend Maya, who had floated me a small personal loan, no interest, after Dad's hospice bills swallowed my emergency fund. I thought of the clockmaker's hands, trembling but steady when he'd slid the keys across the counter with mine. I said, keeping my voice small because they didn't know how to hold large things gently. Liar. Lena said sweetly, without missing a beat, you used Mom's money. Or Dad's. That's where the watch went. You sold it to fund this fantasy. She waved the deed like it was something she'd plucked from the air. You always wanted something that wasn't yours. Mom's mouth was a thin, disappointed line. Iva, she said. Tell me you didn't. I felt something inside me go still. It was the stillness that comes before an earthquake. I thought of Dad's watch again. a tick like a second heart. When he'd taken it off at night, he'd left it on his dresser atop a folded handkerchief. After the funeral, the watch had sat there for a week. Then it had disappeared. I hadn't said anything. I knew better than to mention ghosts in a house that preferred to pretend. I didn't take the watch, I repeated. And I didn't use your money. I looked at Lena. Give me the deed. She smiled with all her teeth. Not if it's evidence. I breathed in through my nose and out through my mouth, a trick I'd learned to keep from crying in places where crying wasn't allowed. What evidence? I asked softly. Off fraud. Lena handed the paper to Mom. Offer using Dad's accounts. You know he had that investment account you never touched. She reached out and tucked a piece of hair behind my ear with a touch that felt like a slap. Sweetheart, you've always been creative. I could hear my pulse in my ears. A part of me was 12 years old again, hearing Dad's laugh down the hall, the sound of safety. Check the accounts, I said to Mom. Call the bank. Ask Maya. She gave me a loan. The down payment is mine. I looked at Lena. You know where the watch is? Lena's eyes glinted. Careful, she said. Accusations are ugly on you. A wind rattled the lemon-scented quiet. In the hall, a draft lifted the corner of the plastic runner on the carpet. My mug's steam had thinned and disappeared. I balanced on the edge of wanting to scream and the discipline of not giving her the satisfaction. Keep the deed for now, I said finally. I'll bring the bank statements. Bring a lawyer? Lena murmured, but she was already folding the paper with neat, proprietary hands, like she was tucking away a receipt for a blouse she intended to return after wearing once. I left before I choked on the smell of silver polish. On the drive home, the city poured its sodium lamps over my windshield in a broken necklace of light. I drove past the storefront, the one with the tin ceiling and the stubborn door. I pictured strangers laughing around workbenches as tiny sparks jumped and settled, the hiss of an espresso machine like applause. I pictured a long wooden table where someone could fix a broken lamp, where a kid could learn to use a drill press safely, where an old man might teach knots to a handful of teenagers. I pictured a watch on my wrist that had belonged to a man who'd taught me how to respect small gears and big promises. When I parked and cut the engine, the night exhaled. I sat in the quiet until my phone buzzed. A text from Lena. We should probably talk about your little purchase. Don't do anything rash. A second text followed. Love you. You know, I always look out for you. I laughed out loud, a small, bitter sound that startled me with its shape. I typed, deleted, typed again. Finally, we'll talk. Then I went upstairs, sat at my thrifted kitchen table, and opened my laptop. I pulled up the bank statements, the loan agreement I'd signed with Maya, the cashier's check receipt with the clockmaker's name on it, the closing statement from the title company, a paper shield, too thin to stop a bullet, but better than skin. When my email pinged, I thought briefly of Mercy. Then I opened it. Lena had sieged Mom and our family's old attorney, a man who still wore cologne that could make a flower faint. The subject line, urgent misappropriation concerns. The body, hi all. I'm concerned Ava may have accessed funds that were meant for estate expenses. She purchased a commercial property. I want to ensure everything is above board. Love, Lena. She signed her name with a looping L, like a flourish on a bill of sale. The earthquake inside me stood up and paced. I thought I could write back. I could attach all my proof. I could lay myself on the altar of their disbelief and offer up my throat like a ribbon. Or I could do what Dad had taught me when we stained our fingers together at the kitchen table, coaxing a stubborn clock into cooperation. Don't force. Observe. Find the piece that sticks and free it first. So I closed my laptop. I stood at the sink and washed my single plate, my fork, my mug. I put them in the drying rack in a crooked little row. And then, hands still wet, I said out loud to the plants in the window and the damp silence of my apartment, I didn't take the watch. Saying it steadied me. Saying it let me hear the other thing, the thing under it. But she took everything else. The lights of the city flickered like a language I almost remembered. I toweled my hands and made a promise that tasted like metal and relief. If Lena wanted to play with proof, with stories, with ownership, I would give her the one thing she never believed I had, patience sharpened into precision. I would take it all back. Before Lena learned how to turn a room into a jury, we were just two girls with a shared bathroom and a war over the good hairbrush. In the beginning, it felt like we were close because we had to be bunk beds, one bookshelf, a tin of Barrett's we pretended not to share. She was beautiful early, a child whose eyes made old women pinch her cheeks and say, "You'll break hearts." I was the kid who liked to take apart the toaster and line up the screws by size. Attention stuck to her like static. I learned to live behind it. Dad called us his day and night. He said it lovingly, but day casts shadows, night swallows them whole. When I was 10, I pried the battery door off the TV remote with a butter knife so I could fix the spring. "You'll be an engineer," he said, ruffling my hair, even though we couldn't afford camps or kits or any of the things the other kids in my class got to build with. He took me to flea markets where I bought broken things for $1 and found the quiet joy of making them breathe again. At the same time, Mom taught Lena how to stand in heels and say thank you without ceding ground. People will give you what you ask for, Mom told her, if you ask like you already own it. The first betrayal was small enough to hide in a jewelry box. I had saved for months to buy a simple silver pendant, oval, engraved with a star. I wanted to wear something that wasn't hand me down, something that said, "Here I am." I put it on in front of the mirror and decided I looked like a different version of myself. Still me, but upgraded. Like when I found a way to polish an old brass knob back to a shine. The next morning, the pendant was gone. I borrowed it, Lena said, breezy, already wearing it to school with a sweater that matched the exact gray of the metal. Don't be such a baby. I'll give it back. Weeks went by. She wore it like she'd birthed it. When I asked for it, she rolled her eyes. You're so obsessed with things. When she finally returned it, the chain was knotted, kinked in ugly places that never lay flat again. We learned our roles. She took. I fixed. She told a story. I lived around it. In high school, her story was that she was destined. The right boys asked her to the right dances. Teachers said promise when they said her name. Meanwhile, I joined the robotics team after I saw a flyer that said no experience necessary. It turned out that was a lie. Everyone had experience. I showed up with hands that knew how to hold delicate secrets and learned to solder from YouTube. I learned how to talk in rooms where no one expected my voice. I learned how to lose and show up again anyway. I learned that when you strip wire too short, you can start over. Dad picked me up from meets in his old sedan and brought thermoses of cocoa. It tasted like bravery. Lena's college acceptance came in a thick envelope with glossy photos of brick and ivy. Mine came via email from the state university with a partial scholarship and a polite note about demonstrated financial need. Mom cried when she saw Lena's brochure spread across the kitchen table. She cried differently when she saw my email, like relief, like a bill paid. Dad hugged me and said, "You'll make your own road." I believed him because he made everything look like a road if you stared long enough. College was fluorescent lights and late buses and 3 part-time jobs. I learned to move through labs full of boys who pretended not to see me until they needed answers. I learned to be invisible and essential at the same time. When Lena visited over spring break, she brought friends who giggled at my dorm with its cinder block walls and shared bathroom. They dropped the names of professors like confetti and said things like networking and legacy. I smiled and served them cafeteria cookies on paper napkins. When they left, my room smelled like perfume and the word almost. The night Dad had his first stroke, I was 2 hours away sitting cross-legged on a library floor, trying to make sense of a textbook that insisted on only speaking in abstractions. Mom called and her voice had a shape I didn't recognize. I drove home in the dark, past billboards selling miracles. The hospital was bright and awful. Dad looked small in a way that made my chest cave in. He came back to us a little frayed, then steadied himself like a clock you jostle and sat upright. The second stroke took him down more softly, as if tenderness and cruelty had made a private deal. The third was final. Grief rearranged the furniture of the house. We tripped over it. Mom became brittle, then busy, then brittle again. Lena became a hero in her own narrative, my mother's savior, because she knew how to handle phone calls and funerals in a black dress that fit like a smirk. I became the pair of hands that did what was needed. When the hospice counselor said to make memory boxes, I organized them. When the priest asked for favorite stories, I wrote them down and folded them into my pocket where my fingers found them like prayer beads. After the funeral, I went to the old clock shop on Maple, the one Dad liked because the owner's hands were always patient. The bell on the door was shy. The air smelled like oil and hope. I think I went because I wanted to be in a room where time was something you could see. The clockmaker, Mr. Rosario, showed me a watch and said, "People think this is about seconds. It's about balance." He meant the escapement, the little lever that regulates the tick. I nodded like he'd said something about God. Then came the estate, which wasn't large, but felt like a house with too many doors. There were the obvious things: the car, the life insurance, the house itself, and the unexpected. An annuity Dad had never mentioned. The investment account with its stubborn numbers, the watch that vanished, the sense that Lena had already claimed the story we would tell. Mom wanted quiet. "No scenes?" she said. "Your father hated scenes." Lena wanted control. "I'll handle the calls," she said, and the lawyer nodded because power recognizes its reflection. In the months that followed, my life became small on purpose so I could save money in a shape that would become something. I shared a basement apartment with spiders that minded their own business. I graded papers at night for a professor who wrote good in the margins like he was trying to hurt the word. I answered phones at the clinic and learned the names of regulars' pets. I paid down my student loans and paid attention to buildings. That's when I met Mr. Rosario's brother, who who told me the clock shop's landlord was looking to sell the tiny building next door. It was nothing and everything narrow, stubborn, perfect. I ran numbers until they sang. I made a deck with lazy fonts because design would come later, clarity had to come now. I asked Maya for the loan. I asked the bank for a small business mortgage, and the mortgage officer shrugged like ambition bored him, then surprised himself by saying yes. I brought the clockmaker cookies the day I signed. I carried the keys home in my pocket, heavy with a promise I'd made to a girl who lined up screws by size. I didn't tell my family because I wanted to hold a secret that would not be used against me. I didn't tell them because they had never believed in the slow burn. I didn't tell them because every time I tried to show them something made by my hands, Lena had blinked at it like a mirror that refused to reflect. The watch still wasn't there. Dad's dresser wore a perfect square of dust where it had slept. No one talked about it, but the absence rang like a bell I couldn't unhear. Sometimes I'd stand in his doorway and imagine the second heart still ticking, unable to find a wrist to steady it. Then the email, the accusation, the deed in Lena's purse like a trophy taken from a fallen opponent. The old attorney's reply arrived in my inbox before I could brush my teeth. Let's schedule a time to review documents. Transparency will ease all minds. I pictured a shiny desk, the bowl of hard candies no one ever ate, the diplomas that needed no introduction. I closed my eyes and saw Dad at the kitchen table. A clock spread open between us, gears catching light like secrets learning how to gleam. Don't force, he said. Observe. When I opened my eyes, I knew what I had to watch. The humiliation took root the way bindweed does, under the surface until one day it is suddenly everywhere. It started with whispers. The ladies from Mom's church, women who blessed gossip with prayer, tilted their heads in my direction and said words like confusion and pressure. And poor thing, in tones that burned my skin. When I walked into the corner store, Mr. Hayes handed me change like I might run with his register. I thought of the email, the CCs, the way Lena made everything look like concern. At the attorney's office, Lena arrived late and beautiful, smelling like softly spoken money. Mom came in on time, lips pressed together so tightly it looked painful. The attorney, Parson, gestured to a polished table that reflected my face in a way that made me look both older and less substantial. He had a pen like a weapon. Let's start with tone, he said with a smile that wasn't one. No one is accusing anyone of anything. We simply want clarity. I'm accusing her, Lena said lightly, pulling the deed from her purse and placing it on the table like she was laying down an ace. Or at least I'm questioning. It's such a big purchase. I placed a folder in front of me. It was thicker than her single page, but it didn't feel heavier. I used my own money, I said, and a small loan from a friend, all documented. I slid the bank statements across, highlighting deposits and withdrawals. I slid the cashier's check receipt, the closing documents, the loan agreement with Maya's tidy signature. I'd like my deed back. Mister? Parson shuffled papers like he needed to remind himself how to look busy. And the watch, he asked mildly. Where does it come into this? I didn't take it, I said. I have no idea where it is. Lena lifted her chin, a move that always made people look, as if she'd yanked the room up by a string. Dad told me I could have it. 2 days before he died. Her voice softened to a tremor that deserved a microphone. He said it reminded him of me because it was reliable. She dabbed her eye with a tissue she'd brought for the moment. And then it vanished. I'm not saying Ava took it. You literally are, I said, but my voice was tired, not sharp. You are saying exactly that. Mom cleared her throat. We all grieve differently, she said, which was her way of telling me that my grief had the wrong shoes on. Let's not turn this into a spectacle. I swallowed the comeback that wanted to leap. Spectacles were Lena's specialty. Mine was doing the work that made things run. I want my deed, I repeated. Mr. Parson tapped his pen against the polished wood. Returning it to Ava seems appropriate if her paperwork is in order. He scanned the pages, eyes sliding over figures until they found something to rest on. Yes, yes, this appears legitimate. Lena's smile went winter cold. She slid the deed back toward me with 2 fingers as if proximity might stain her. Of course, she said sweetly. I just needed to be sure. She stood. The meeting was clearly over in her mind. Mom, lunch, she asked, already moving toward the door, expecting gravity to bend the room in her direction. Mom hesitated. For a second, her eyes met mine. There was something like apology there, small and shy. Then it left. Yes, she said to Lena, and they were gone. When the door clicked shut, Mr. Parson leaned back and exhaled. Families, he said with a chuckle meant to bond us. I'll email you both a memo summarizing today's decisions. He gathered his papers, as if decisiveness were contagious. I slid the deed into my folder, folded the folder into my purse, and walked out into a day that was too bright for the room I'd just left. On the sidewalk, my phone buzzed. A text from Maya, you okay? You've been quiet. I wrote back, family circus, but the tent is coming down. She sent me a heart, then a second message, come by the shop later. I've got something for you. Something for me turned out to be a spare set of hands and a visitor, Mr. Rosario, the clockmaker. He sat at my future cafe's long, unfinished table, a paper bag of empanadas between us. You bought the building next to my brother's, so now you are family, he announced, which felt like an absolution after the morning I'd had. He placed a small package wrapped in brown paper onto the table. For your wall. Inside was a schoolhouse clock with a cracked face and a pendulum that hung like a question. She runs, he said, but her heart is tired. I thought you might like the challenge. I set the clock upright. Gently, so gently I touched the escapement. It trembled, then steadied. I thought of Dad again, of his hands guiding mine not by force, but by patience. Thank you, I said, and my voice was unsteady with something like relief, like being seen. I'll hang her where everyone has to listen. Good, he said, pushing the bag of empanadas toward me. We build places so we can hear the right things. The right things. Like my name spoken without a sigh, like a watch ticking in a room that welcomed it, like the truth which is often quieter than a lie until you put a microphone to it. The humiliation didn't stop after the deed came home. It got smarter. A rumor flowered I was unstable. I had pressured a dying man for signatures. I had flown too close to something I didn't deserve and burned myself, as people like me always did. Lena never said any of it where a recorder could hear, but the petals drifted anyway, sticking to me. Mom's friends stopped inviting me to luncheons that smelled like chicken salad and inherited perfume. At the clinic, a woman with a tight bun and tighter mouth leaned across the counter and said, "It's a shame what you did," though her voice carried the thrill of owning a secret. I blinked. "Excuse me," I said, even though I knew. She shrugged, embarrassed to be caught enjoying herself. People talk. I started keeping a list. Every time I lost a thing I hadn't been told was mine to begin with: a lunch invitation, a tone of voice, the benefit of the doubt, a watch that ticked whether you believed it or not. The escalation wasn't content with whispers. It wanted a headline. It got one when Lena announced her new venture at a charity event that made the local lifestyle page. Lena Carter to open Community Innovation Cafe, a space where everyday makers could gather to build, repair, and learn. The article featured a photo of my sister in a pale dress, holding a ceramic mug like a trophy, standing in front of a mocked up rendering that looked suspiciously like my building's interior. Same tin ceiling, same brick. The quote below her photo was mine, word for word, the one I'd used in my deck to describe the heart of the project. Will be the place where people come to repair what they own and build what they dream. I sat on my floor and read the article 3 times the way you check a fresh wound you can't stop probing. The rendering included a long communal table. The caption called it the Carter table, named after our family. I laughed then, not bitter, but something wilder. It sounded like a wrong note a piano keeps hitting because someone nailed it there. I texted Lena the link without commentary. Her reply was immediate: "You should be happy for me. We're finally on the same page." Then a second message: "It's not personal. It's business. I can bring you on as staff if you want. We're hiring." A winking emoji followed, like she couldn't help herself. My fingers trembled. I typed, "It's my building." I deleted it. I typed, "It's my idea." I deleted that too. Instead, "Congratulations." I pressed send because saying less would give me more room to move later. That night, I went to the storefront and sat on the floor with the schoolhouse clock and whispered to it like an accomplice. She took the story. I told the pendulum. She always does. The pendulum swung slow and even, like it was showing me how. "Okay?" I said into the empty room. "Okay." When the contractor I'd hired called the next morning to say he had to push my build out 2 months, I braced my phone between my cheek and shoulder and wrote the new timeline on a post-it with a steady hand. After we hung up, I stared at the yellow square like it held a spell. 2 months meant Lena would open first if her press was to be believed. Opening first means telling the story first. Stories, I knew better than anyone, are not about facts, they're about the order in which you receive them. I thought of all the times Lena had walked into a room and arranged it around her. I thought of Dad's hands again, guiding, never forcing. I thought of balance, the lever that keeps time honest by allowing and stopping in equal measure. Okay, I said to the clock, to the keys in my pocket, to the scratch floor I would sand smooth. Then I began to plan. The turning point didn't look like a movie moment. No thunderclap, no epiphany that snapped my spine straight in one miraculous second. It looked like late nights with spreadsheets and early mornings with coffee gone cold. It looked like listening. It looked like a list I made in my notebook under the heading, "What They Think is the Story." Underneath, I wrote, "Poor Ava steals Dad's watch and Mom's faith. Poor Ava steals an idea because she can't make her own. Poor Ava needs saving from herself, from reality, from this town's memory of her as the girl who can't climb a rope." Then I made a second list. What is the story? Lena took the watch. Lena took my idea, wrapped it in PR ribbon, called it hers. Lena believes stories belong to whoever speaks first and prettiest. I know how to build a room that tells the truth without raising its voice. I had learned things in all those rooms where no one expected me to speak. I had learned that some power is loud. I had learned that some power is quiet and patient and gets its hands dirty. I wasn't going to sue her. Not yet. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to send emails with subject lines that begged to be misinterpreted. I was going to build something she couldn't steal in allegiance to function that would expose her form. The first part of the plan was community. Not the shiny photograph kind, the kind that sweeps a floor without being asked, because it wants to eat in a clean place. I pulled the plywood off my store's windows and opened the door, even though the drywall wasn't finished. I put a hand-painted sign in the glass open farfix. IT farduis py dochtuocaine. I borrowed folding tables and lined them with thrifted lamps I'd repaired, screwdrivers sorted by size, a tray of watch springs that winked like secrets. I posted in the neighborhood group and in the clinic lobby and told Mr. Hayes at the corner store, who told everyone who bought a lottery ticket that week. Bring your broken, I wrote. We'll see what we can do. On the first Friday, 3 people came. A woman with a wobbly stool, a teenager with a skateboard that lost a wheel weekly, a man with a blender that smelled like burnt toast. We fixed the stool with wood glue and clamps. We taught the teenager how to tighten bearings and why threadlock is a thing you can trust. We discovered the blender was a lost cause and gave the man a mug of coffee and a slice of lemon cake that Maya brought. And we made jokes about smoothies you should never drink. When they left, they put $10.18 in the jar marked, "Off you, Han." I wanted to cry from the right kind of gratitude. We kept going. The second Friday, 6 people came. The third week, 12. The room began to look like the picture I kept in my head, strangers bent over, parts together, helping, laughing, failing and learning and trying again. The schoolhouse clock I'd hung on the back wall swung its tired pendulum and kept time for us. I started learning people's names. They started learning mine. The second part of the plan was provenance. The truth likes records. I created a blog and posted photos that showed hands, not faces problems, not logos questions, not quotes that could be sliced and pasted into someone else's deck. I wrote about the heart of the space in words that were too specific to be lifted without looking obvious. A man named Louise, whose daughter's toy train needed a wheel, we 3D printed and painted red. Bennett's toaster that came back to life and made her cry because her late husband had gifted it to her on a Tuesday when there was no reason to celebrate except love. I asked Mr. Rosario to write a little history of the clock on my wall, which he did in looping script that made the post look like a love letter to balance. The blog grew quietly, but the right people read it. A local teacher asked if her students could come learn to change a drill bit. A librarian emailed to say she had a stack of how to manuals from a closed branch if I wanted them. The city's small business council shared one of my posts and added, "This is what we mean when we say Main Street matters." The third part of the plan was patience. I knew Lena's new cafe. The Carter table would open with sparkle and speeches. She'd be on the morning show with the host who liked to wear loud tays. There would be a ribbon, a giant pair of scissors, and the word visionary used twice in the same sentence. I let it happen. I was there, actually standing at the back, anonymous among the well-heeled, wearing my thrift store coat like armor. Lena wore white and kissed cheeks and said things into microphones that made people nod. She never once mentioned me. The ribbon fluttered to the floor in a minor surrender. The cameras clicked. The coffee was excellent and too expensive. The workbenches had the right look and the wrong height. My eye caught the way people had to hunch. I knew how long it would take before backs ached and customers didn't know why. I complimented the barista. I tipped too much. I leaned against a wall and listened. I heard her sister had the idea first. Someone whispered near me, "She's the prettier one." The other person murmured back as if that closed the case. A week later, a reporter came to my Fix It Friday with a notebook and a cautious smile. "I did a story on your sister's place," she admitted. It photographed beautifully. She looked around at the sawdust and the crook sign and the schoolhouse clock with its cracked face, and her shoulders lowered without losing shape. "But this feels real." "It is," I said simply, because truth doesn't need adjectives. She interviewed Mrs. Bennett and Louise and the teenager with the skateboard. She took a photo of the clock and asked me about time. I said, "Time is a collaboration," and immediately felt silly because it sounded like I'd been practicing in a mirror. But she wrote it down. The article came out under a headline I didn't expect but loved immediately: "Fixing what we have, building what we need." It didn't mention Lena. It didn't have to. The fourth part of the plan was the watch. I had been turning the question over like a stone in my pocket, waiting for my palm to polish it smooth. Where is it? Who would she give it to? What would she do with something that only meant status if people knew she had it? That last question answered itself. Lena wouldn't wear a heavy, old-fashioned watch except as a story. She needed it on a wrist that could tell the world that story on cue, a wrist held aloft at the right dinners. Her boyfriend, Ethan, was an investment advisor whose jawline was as sharp as his suits. He liked to occupy airspace with his laugh and his opinion. He liked vintage pieces. He often forgot my name on purpose. He posted on social media in a way that looked like spontaneity and timed like strategy. I started watching his posts the way you listen for a tell in a game you can't afford to lose. There it was, 2 weeks after the ribbon, cutting a wrist shot in the golden light of an expensive restaurant. The caption time is money with a winky face that hurt to look at. The watch was cropped because he would never give away status too easily, but the edge of the face and the shape of the lugs and the way the light hit the crystal made my body go still. I knew that watch like I knew my own name. I texted the photo to Mr. Rosario, who confirmed with 3 words, "That's your father's." The turn, that moment when the story chooses its next path, wasn't me confronting Ethan in a room full of men who say, "Sweetheart," to bar staff. It wasn't me screaming at Lena in a kitchen that would turn my anger into proof that I was who they said I was. It was me calling the one person who loved the law the way I loved a well-oiled jeer. Dad's friend, Mrs. Klein, a retired judge who baked bread on Sundays and scared men with her eyebrows. "Bring me everything," she said, voice like gravel and sugar. "Every receipt, every text, every post. Don't tell them you know." Not yet. I gathered what I had. I printed the wrist shot. I printed Ethan's other posts where the watch peeked like a shy accomplice. I pulled the estate inventory that listed the watch as decedent's personal property, intended distribution TBD. I included the transcript from the hospice nurse's note where Dad had said, "The girls will figure it out," about the watch, which Lena had turned into a promise to her. I wrote a statement. Maya proofread it, removed the parts where my pain tried to eat my clarity, underlined the parts that held. Mrs. Klein called the old attorney, who tried to ooze his way out of decisiveness. And then she called the police liaison. She still played bridge with, and then she called me? "We're going to do this clean," she said. "No drama. Documentation. And you, Iva, you're going to stand very still while truth has its turn?" That's what I did. I stood still when a detective with kind hands came to see me and took my statement. I stood still when he went to see Ethan and asked him to produce documentation of ownership, which he couldn't because men like him don't buy watches with receipts. They buy them with charm and availability. I stood still when he knocked on my mother's door and asked her who had last seen the watch, and Mom, brittle and busy, said it disappeared, but her eyes faltered in a way that wrote my childhood on her face. I stood still when the detective requested security footage from the house on the day the watch went missing, and Mr. Parson tried to suggest there was no system, but forgot that my father had installed a smart camera because he liked to stare at the front door when pain kept him from sleep. The footage was fuzzy but generous. Lena entering Dad's bedroom after the hospice aide had left because she needed to lie down. Lena leaving 15 minutes later with something tucked into her oversized sweater sleeve. And the detective paused the frame. Lena's face was turned toward the camera, not looking at it, her mouth set in a line that tried not to be a smile. "Sometimes," Mrs. Klein said when we watched the clip together, "justice waits because it wants to be sure." The turning point turned. The detective called Ethan. Ethan handed over the watch in a velvet pouch like it had pained him to keep it. He said he'd been planning to mention it, that of course it wasn't his, that he loved familial heirlooms, and had meant to have it appraised for us. The detective wrote what he said and what he didn't. Then he called Lena, and the town that had been humming with a pretty story suddenly had to relearn the melody. I didn't post. I didn't call. I didn't show up at my mother's with the police. I opened my shop on a Friday and set the watch on the long table in a glass dome like a museum display. I put a small card beside it with a single sentence. "Some things were always mine, even when they weren't in my hands." People came, they looked. They asked, I told the truth in a voice so even it surprised me. I watched the story shift the way a river does when it meets a rock you didn't see from the bank. The water found a new path, not because I forced it, but because rocks do not apologize. Revenge, when it finally came, was quiet and exacting and wore an apron. I hosted a grand opening that wasn't grand, no ribbon, no giant scissors, no camera crew, just a Saturday. Maya baked cinnamon rolls that made the street smell like welcome. Mr. Rosario tuned the schoolhouse clock so it ticked like a metronome for the day. Mrs. Bennet brought a bouquet from her yard, a riot of zinnias that looked like a child's drawing of joy. We opened early and kept the door propped with a cinder block we had wrapped in denim and tied with twine so the edge wouldn't chew the wood. I had set up stations sewing and mending, small electronics trayage, a corner where someone's grandpa could teach anyone who wanted to learn how to sharpen a knife on a whetstone. I hired 2 teenagers, Dell and Simone, to greet people and write their names on painter's tape that we stuck to shirts like camp. My pricing was messy on purpose. A jar that said Piedon Hayfields Fayar, a tip jar that said Kiolagi Fidias, a small sign, memberships coming soon with a list of benefits that felt like promises I could keep. Tool library access, priority bench time, a monthly class. People came like water through a door left open. They brought lamps and questions and company. They brought a hunger I recognized from my own bones, the need to be part of something that worked. Mid morning, Lena walked in. She wore black like a decision. Ethan trailed her, trying to look smaller. Mom didn't come, but I could see her in the angle of Lena's shoulders. The room shifted, a small wobble, like someone had bumped a table and steadied it without raising a fuss. Lena looked around with an expression I'd seen since we were kids, cataloging, assigning value with the precision of a cash register. She stopped at the watch under the glass. Her face didn't move. Cute, she said finally, voice low. Accurate, I replied gently. She lifted her chin. We should talk. We're talking? Privately. I led her to the back, past the bathroom door with the hand lettered, U2F or DR, sign I used to keep people out while we fixed a stubborn leak. We stood between two shelves of donated manuals and jars of button assortments. She crossed her arms. You made me look like a thief. I stared at her, letting the quiet pull focus. You took Dad's watch. She inhaled through her nose like she was smelling something she wanted to remember later. We both know Dad wanted me to have it. What we both know, I said, is that he wanted us to figure it out together. You took that from me, and then you tried to take this. I gestured to the room, to the clock's steady heartbeat, to the laughter that had begun to rise like steam from the front. You took the story, like you always do. Only this time you picked up the wrong end. Her eyes flashed. You're ungrateful, she said. I tried to help you. I offered you a job. I felt my mouth curve in a smile I didn't have to practice. You offered me a position at a place you built from my plans. I tilted my head. You should fix your benches. People are going to have back pain. She blinked, confused by the pivot, as if physics had betrayed her. What? They're an inch too low, I said. You'll see it in the receipts for ibuprofen. Her face hardened. You always make everything so dreary. This could have been fun. We could have been partners. She said the last word like it had a taste. You don't want partners, I said. You want props. I want to win, she corrected, and in that moment, I loved her for telling the truth if only to herself. You already lost, I said quietly, because I'm not playing your game. She stepped closer. You have no idea the people I know, the doors I can open. It wasn't a threat, it was a muscle memory. Watch me open mine, I said, and the part of me that had stood still through the worst of it stretched and breathed. She took a breath and recalibrated an old skill. Fine, you want to be noble. Be noble. But you're not going to last. This pay what you can nonsense. It's not sustainable. You don't know how to think big. You never did. I gestured toward the front. The room hummed like a hive that knew exactly what to do. Big isn't the only shape worth making, I said. Sometimes it's just the loudest. She stared at me like she didn't recognize the person answering her back without handing her blood in a bowl. Mum's devastated, she said, as if it were a trump card. She thinks you're cruel. I let the words land and then settle. They didn't stick. I'm sorry she's hurting, I said and meant it. I'm done paying for it. She opened her mouth, closed it. For a second, she looked like a kid again, the one who stole my pendant and knotted the chain without meaning to. For a second, I saw the part of her that wanted attention to feel like love. Then she blinked and the softness left. You don't get to keep the watch, she said, the old confidence returning like a driver who knows every bump in the road. It's not fair. I smiled in a way that wasn't unkind. It never was. We stood in the aisle of manuals and buttons, two sisters in the shape life had forced us into and the shape we'd chosen for ourselves now. You can come back, I said finally, surprising myself with the one in it. A's a person, not a brand. Bring something to fix. Sit at the table. No cameras. She laughed a sharp, pretty sound. You're ridiculous. She turned and walked away on heels that sounded like tiny hammers. At the door, she paused and glanced at the watch under glass. For a moment, half a breath, her face changed. Not regret? Not exactly. Recognition, then she left. Ethan followed, his eyes sliding over the glass dome, over my face, over anything not reflective. The door closed, the room reset, the clock kept time. Revenge wasn't a headline that week. It was receipts, small and numerous. Membership sign-ups that exceeded the number I'd written on my post-it goal and then crossed out because I didn't want to jinx it. A donation from the teachers' union to sponsor a monthly Fix Your Classroom night. A call from the library about hosting a workshop on mending and zane making. A message from the reporter. Your sister's benches are causing issues. People are complaining about their backs. She's looking for solutions. I sent her the name of my carpenter. He sent me a text with a string of laughing emojis followed by thanks for the business. Boss. A week later, a letter arrived from Mr. Parsons' office. It was short and so formal it made my eyes cross. A notice that the estate's personal property, the watch, had been providently removed and had been returned. The matter was closed. No apology. No admission. just a door shutting with polite finality. I pinned the letter up in the back room next to the fire extinguisher. Then I went out and taught Simone how to replace a sewing machine belt without pricking her finger. People started to tell their friends. They brought more broken things and left with fewer. A teenager asked if we could help him build a speaker out of a shoebox because his little sister wanted music in her room and they didn't have money for something new. We said yes. A woman brought her grandmother's necklace with the chain kinked into ugliness. I taught her how to soften metal with patience. She cried. I cried with her, and then we laughed at our ridiculous, leaky faces. Revenge wasn't a knife, it was a table mine and the people who chose to sit at it. Mom didn't come to my shop until fall. The leaves on Maple Street had decided to act like confetti. The air tasted like apples. She walked in like a woman entering a church that had once expelled her, stiff, wary, full of a faith she didn't recognize yet. Her hair was done. Her mouth was still a thin line, but it wobbled at the edges. She stood just inside the door and looked at everything like she might be accused of touching. Hi, Mom, I said, because anything fancier would turn into a speech. I was wiping a table with a rag that had seen better days. I kept wiping. The clock held the silence without making it feel like punishment. It smells like bread, she said finally. Maya's, I said. Cinnamon rolls. Still warm. I gestured to the counter where a plate waited under a glass dome. Do you want one? She hesitated, then nodded in a way that looked like surrender and politeness at the same time. I poured coffee and placed a roll on a plate and watched her take a bite. Her eyes closed, just for a second, and a memory crossed her face like a cloud and fast forward. Your grandmother made these, she said, voice far away, on Saturdays. Your father used to. She stopped. The word used to is a door too heavy to swing open often. We stood at the counter like strangers practicing intimacy. I said, how are you? The way adults ask because they've agreed to pretend they can measure answers. She looked around again. People like it here. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a compliment. It was what she could say. They do, I said, because it was true. She put the plate down and folded her hands, fingers twisting around each other like roots. I was unkind, she said. To you. She stared at her hands as if they might tell her what to say next. I let Lena tell me the story because it was easier to recognize. I know, I said, the two words a sash I could carry. Both did that. For a long time, she swallowed. I'm ashamed, she said softly, and the sentence didn't explode either of us. It just floated, like a leaf that had finished falling. I don't need you to be ashamed, I said. I need you to see me. My voice wanted to shake, it didn't. The clock ticked, carefully. She nodded once, a small mercy. Your father would have, she stopped, tried again. He would have liked this place. The noise, the purpose. She smiled, tiny like a bird testing a perch. He would have sat at that table and offered advice no one asked for. He would have reorganized the screws, I said, and she laughed, a real gasp, surprised into honesty. The sound made something unclench in my chest that had been a fist for too long. We didn't talk about the watch. We didn't talk about the letter from Mr. Parson. We didn't talk about the way she had looked away in rooms where I needed her eyes. We stood together and ate cinnamon rolls and let the smell of bread do what bread has always done, give shape to hunger without judging it. When she left, she put a 20 in the jar marked Luo Can and whispered, don't tell your sister. Then she squeezed my hand. Her palm was warm and dry. I'll come on Fridays, she said, as if it were a vow. She did. She started showing up with a tin of buttons from her sewing box and a story for each. The red one from a dress she wore to a dance where Dad stepped on her hem, the tiny pearl from a blouse her mother used to wear on Sundays, the square, black button from a coat she bought with her first paycheck and wore until the elbows shined. She sat with Mrs. Bennett and they made friends with the easy intimacy of women who had once been girls measuring themselves in the mirrors of others. Lena didn't come back. But her cafe changed. She raised the benches an inch. Her social media lost the floaty optimism and grew a spine. She posted about mistakes, about fixing them, about listening. It was performative, yes, sometimes, but it was also a kind of growth only arrogance can build when it's bored with itself. People told me I didn't look. When the city announced a small business grant competition, I told myself I didn't have time. Then Maya printed the application and set it on my table with a piece of tape that said Duo IT. I rolled my eyes at her the way she expected me to and did it. I wrote about Fix It Fridays in the tool library and the way people smiled when a lamp decided it wanted to live. I wrote about memberships in teens and how the clock sounded like relief. I didn't win. I came in second and got a smaller grant and a write-up that said things like grassroots and impact and sustainability. Lena won. Of course she did. Her presentation had professional slides and a tagline and a dress that looked like money felt. I didn't mind. I thought I would, but I didn't. Second felt right out of the spotlight in the work. The write-up brought us more members than the money would have. The weeks folded into each other like laundry. The watch ticked under glass. Sometimes, when the light hit it just right, it looked like time was winking at me. I took my father's watch back without stealing a thing. On a Tuesday that smelled like rain, the retired judge, Mrs. Klein, came in carrying a canvas bag. She pulled a manila folder out and waved it like a conductor. I did a thing, she said, because I'm old and I like paper. Inside was a certificate, incorporation of the Carter Table Cooperative, LLC, my name on it, not the brand, but the shape I wanted, shared ownership, board seats reserved for community members, teens who reached a certain number of hours receiving a stake, dividends small and real. I stared at it. We're not the Carter Table, I said. That's not the brand, she said with a little bark of a laugh. The idea. The table is the point. You can't copyright furniture. I blinked, then laughed, then cried because my body didn't know what else to do. We filed the papers. We became ours. I invited Lena to the first board meeting because I am either an idiot or a poet. She didn't come. She sent flowers. They were gorgeous and smelled like judgment. We kept them anyway and put them on the counter so people could say, "Whoa." And then we sent a dozen cinnamon rolls to her cafe with a note that said, "For your table." I didn't sign my name. Revenge had shifted. It wasn't about taking something from her anymore. It was about making something she could not unmake. The ending didn't demand a parade, it asked for an inventory. Here is what changed. Mom now came every Friday with a tin that got lighter and a heart that got heavier and then lighter too, like muscles you use after letting them go slack too long. She started telling the truth in small pieces, like someone learning to eat after an illness. I was so proud of how pretty Lena was, she said one day, pushing a blue button across the table, that I forgot to be proud of how good you were. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She practiced it by showing up with needle and thread and work. The watch remained under glass for a month like a testimony. Then I decided that living things belong on wrists, not altars. I slipped it on one morning and fastened the leather strap with careful fingers. It was heavier than I remembered. It made my arm feel anchored to a man who taught me that balance matters more than spectacle. I wore it like a promise to the girl who lined up screws by size and waited for someone to notice. They did. People asked. I told the truth. The truth behaved. It stayed. Lena's cafe remained open. She made changes. She had to. Her benches rose. Her prices dipped and then stabilized. She started hosting a monthly teach-in where people shared skills for free. She credited the idea to or friends down the block, and I didn't correct her. She and I shared a street without sharpening knives in our windows. Sometimes we passed each other and nodded like diplomats at opposite ends of a table. Once, on a late afternoon that had the strange gold of impending snow, she stepped into my doorway and watched a group of kids build a cardboard city on the floor. Her face softened without consulting her mouth. "It's beautiful," she said. Then she left. It was the truest sentence I had ever heard her say. Ethan was gone. An investment advisor moved into a smaller office across town with cheaper rent and a healthier necktie budget. The rumor was that he had learned to keep receipts. Maya expanded her bakery into the back half of my building with a window that opened into the shop. She fed my members, and my members fed her register. And the smell of cinnamon rolled out onto the sidewalk like a testimony you can taste. The teenager with the skateboard built his own workbench in our back room with Dell's help. They measured twice, cut once, laughed at themselves when they forgot, and cut twice anyway. Simone taught a sewing class to a group of boys who discovered the miracle of hemming pants to the length you actually own. Bennett started a repair cafe at the church and called it In Stitches and brought me their overflow. Mr. Rosario wrote me a note on my birthday that said, "Balance isn't stillness, it's motion that returns home." At night, when the shop was quiet and the clock kept its modest time, I would stand at the door and look at the long table and think of all the things it had held: screws, coffee rings, tears, joy, failure, triumph, bread. I would think of how revenge had become restoration, how justice had learned to bake. I would think of Lena and how we had been taught to believe there was only one seat worth sitting in. I would think of the watch on my wrist and the man who taught me to listen to the small, steady sounds that outlast the loud ones. On the anniversary of the first Fix It Friday, Mom came early with a pie and a photo album. She opened it to a picture of Dad at our old kitchen table. A clock spread open like a patient. I was small, hair in my face, furious at a spring that refused to behave. He was patient, pointing, not touching. "To let you figure it out," Mom murmured. Fingertip on the glossy paper. I never understood that. I thought love meant smoothing. I see now. She closed the album and took my hand. "I'm late, but I'm here." "I know," I said. Lena didn't come that day either, but later that week a package arrived, brown paper, no return address, her careful, precise handwriting. Inside my silver pendant, the chain repaired, the kinks smoothed by someone who had finally learned the patience of metal. There was a note: "You can say I stole it. You'd be right. You can also say I'm giving it back. You'd be right." No apology, no plea, a kind of truth we could live with. I put the pendant on. It lay against my skin like a small, cool promise. It didn't catch the light the way it used to. It didn't need to. I had learned other ways to shine. The city kept moving around us, unbothered and attentive in equal measure. People kept bringing their broken, their hopeful, their almost. The clock kept time. The door kept opening. The table kept holding. I told the story when asked. I didn't punch the ending. I didn't list the lessons like beads. If pressed, I said, my sister stole everything from me, my pendant, my watch, my story. So I built a place where taking doesn't work. And then I took it all back the only way that lasts, by making something that doesn't require an audience to exist. It's not a neat moral, it's a practice. On a Thursday near closing, Lena walked in with a lamp. Vintage brass, beautiful, its cord frayed in a way that looked dangerous and proud. She looked at me like a woman stepping into cold water on purpose. Do you have time? She asked. I glanced at the clock. Always, I said, which was both a kindness and a lie. She placed the lamp on the table with careful hands. We stood side by side, two grown women who used to fight over a hairbrush, and we rewired it together. No cameras, no press, just copper and patience and a cord that gives you light, or girls who never learned to share. We didn't say much. When we were done, she plugged it in. It worked. Of course it did. She lifted it, admiring. You're good at this, she said quietly. I am, I said, and the words finally fit my mouth. She looked at the watch on my wrist. He'd be proud, she said. I think so, I answered, and we believed me together. She left with the lamp and a receipt with the amount blank except for the words, "Pau hate feels fair." Later, she sent a donation in an odd amount, 137.42, that felt like a memory turned into math. Maybe it was the price of the pendant all those years ago, adjusted for inflation. Maybe it was the number that the calculator landed on when you input guilt. Maybe it was nothing and everything. I didn't ask. I wrote it down in a ledger that didn't balance in dollars alone. The next morning, the city woke up and did what cities do: moved, mended, broke, repaired. I unlocked my door and propped it with our denim wrapped block. I won the clock. I listened to the tick align with my pulse. Then I set out the sign that had become our creed: bring your broken. We'll see what we can do. It turned out that was how I took everything back.